State your name and who you represent, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you. My name is Tom Kitchar. I'm president of the Waldo Mining District based out of southwestern Oregon. We were established in 1852, 7 years before Oregon became a state. At that time, we were the only government in southern Oregon, and I like to tell people at that time, we could hang people. I want to thank the chairman, Pierce, and Denny, and the members of the committee. We in Oregon have been fighting with the EPA through our Department of Environmental Quality since 2005. We have been actively seeking to get rid of the MPDS portion of our permit in court for 8 years now. We are still in the middle of that process. I've learned a lot. I want to talk to you today a little bit about what I have found out about the Clean Water Act and what it was supposed to do and the way it's been misinterpreted to suction dredge mining in particular. Let's see if I can get the button to work here for me. Is this the one we were using? Down. Okay. The Clean Water Act generally requires a permit for any discharge or addition of a pollutant into waters of the United States. The important word here, actually there's three of them, is addition, pollutant, and waters of the United States. You notice it doesn't say waters of the state of Idaho or waters of the state of Oregon or California. It says waters of the United States. The Clean Water Act contains two primary permitting schemes. There's what they call a Section 404, which is under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineers for the discharge of dredged or fill material. These type of operations would be your typical large-scale bucket dredge used for clearing navigational channels in some of the larger rivers, harbors, excavations in water to maybe sink pilings for a pier or something like that. And there's Section 402, which is under the jurisdiction of the EPA, for all other discharges that aren't covered by 404. So another way to look at this is the 404 permit is the exemption for 402 under the Clean Water Act. The courts have ruled that each of these permit schemes are mutually exclusive of the other. Under the Clean Water Act, a single discharge into waters of the United States requires either a 404 permit or a 402 permit, but not both. And it's kind of interesting that our latest round of lawsuits against Oregon in 2009, the Oregon Court of Appeals ruled we needed both. Totally ignored a June 2009 U.S. Supreme Court ruling that concluded if you're under 404, you do not need a 402. And what that court decided was that the suspended materials were not dredged material. They magically became pollutant and therefore fall under 402. Of course, we argued that the dredge doesn't make any silt. The suspended fine little particles that stay in suspension in the water that create the turbidity are already present in the stream bed sediment. All we're doing is sucking it up, passing it through the dredge, and putting it back in the water where it came from. We don't change it one bit, except for the little bit that we recover in the sluice box. We don't grind the rocks up. We don't make any more small particles. Nothing. The court totally ignored that. So we're still in court. Section 404, as I mentioned, permits such activities, navigational dredging, in-water construction, and discharges that act as fill. You can actually take materials from onshore, take them to water, and dump them in, like fill in a wetlands. That's fill material. It'd be under 404. There is one exception to 404, which is incidental fallback, which normally would be if you took a shovel and stuck it into 2 feet of water and got a shovel full of sediment, and as you lift that shovel up through the water column, a certain amount of that material is going to wash off of the shovel. That's generally the idea of incidental fallback. Now here's Section 402 is what the problem here today is about. MPDS permits are required for any discharge, addition of a pollutant from a point source into waters of the United States. Okay, the courts have ruled that all 5 of those factors must be present for an MPDS permit to apply. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that addition means materials from the outside world going into the water. So if it was already in the water and you're just putting it back in the same water, there is no addition. There was a case down in Florida, South Florida, Water Management District against some Mikoski Indian tribe, whatever. Sandra Day O'Connor gave a perfect analogy of what addition means. And she basically said, if you have a pot of soup and you take a ladle full of soup and lift it above the pot and then pour it back into the soup, you've added nothing to the soup. It's almost exactly what a suction dredge does. Suction dredges do not add pollutants, but instead we safely remove most heavy pollutants already in the water at no cost to the public. Mr. Green showed a slide with a lot of trash and garbage that was cleaned up out of a claim down in California. This year we have a record, it was put up on Facebook, of some miners on the Umpqua River, which is kind of in central western Oregon. And I don't remember, it was over 400 pounds of lead from fishing were recovered in less than a week. And the picture is, I wish I had it, it's fantastic. It shows a typical park-type picnic table, and you really can't even see the picnic table. They put all this lead that they gathered and just piled it on the picnic table until you can't even see it anymore. So we do recover a lot in places, especially where fishing is popular, and I'm from Minnesota originally. I like to fish just as much as the next guy, but it always puzzled me, why do they get to throw lead in the water and we're not allowed to remove it? Section 402 only applies to waters of the United States, which are defined by the EPA as the navigable waters at the time of statehood. I mentioned this more in my written testimony that I believe you've all got a copy of in more detail. I did not go heavily into this issue of navigable waters, but as the legislature of the state of Idaho, you may want to. The reason I didn't go into it is because there are multiple court decisions that the whole issue is highly confusing. The federal government is pretending as though all waters in the states, not just Idaho, belong to them. So I asked the question, are all waters in Idaho waters of the United States, or are they waters of the state of Idaho? Now the Army Corps has a different definition for waters of the United States. I didn't include it either because it takes about 3 pages, and it deals with the Commerce Act, interstate commerce, international commerce, things like that. It's mostly for transportation purposes. Many of the smaller streams that we mine in, nobody's floating. The dredge won't even float until you move rocks out of the way. The water isn't deep enough. There is no transport. These aren't navigable by any normal meaning of the word. Then we have the congressional intent of the Clean Water Act. This came from, I believe, 1977. Senator Muskie at the time might have been, at least he was heavily involved with it, and the quote from him is, "The bill tries to free from the threat of regulation those kinds of man-made activities which are sufficiently de minimis as to merit general attention at the state and local level and little or no attention at the national level." So here we have 1 or 2 little suction dredge miners that are just minding their own business and want to go out and supplement their income, maybe even maybe it's their primary source of income. They're relatively insignificant what we're doing. The Army Corps for years refuses to permit us because they've already ruled us as de minimis. They say a 4-inch dredge and smaller is totally de minimis and does not need permitting by them, just because it's a waste of everybody's time. This might help this body, this legislative body, in that in the Clean Water Act, under 33 U.S.C. 1370, I'm going to just jump past this. It just says, except as expressly provided in the chapter, nothing in this chapter shall, 1, preclude or deny the right of any state to adopt or enforce any standard or limitation respecting discharges of pollutants. The more important one is this number 2, be construed as impairing or in any manner affecting any right or jurisdiction of the states with respect to the waters, including boundary waters, of such states. So even under the Clean Water Act, they recognize that the actual control of these waters should be under the state. The state can come up with its own whatever limitation or regulation is required to make sure that there is no significant harm occurring to the environment. It does not need the federal agency from Seattle coming in here with their, as we've seen up in Alaska recently, jackbooted thugs in SWAT uniforms to worry about somebody getting the water a little muddy. Okay. And this is just the last slide, just to give you an idea of the scale. I've got a dredge number 51, which would typically be used to dredge out harbors and navigational channels and, you know, like the Columbia River and some of the larger waterways. And if you notice, sitting next to the bucket, as close to scale as I could get, it represents a 4-inch dredge. The whole machine would fit inside that bucket. With one scoop of that bucket is going to move more material than that dredge is going to move in 8 hours. And yet, that big dredge operates under 404, not MPDS permitting. And I thank this committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.